Thank you so much, Professor, and I'm so sorry to cut you short. To try and keep us to time, but the whole day is a problem. But you'll all see on the biography, there's a number of his books listed, one of which is very recent, and I'm sure that would amplify your thoughts, so everyone should look for the opportunity to read your books. Now we have d.Maha Azam. She's a leading policy expert on the Middle East and political Islam, an associate fellow of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. She's head of the Egyptian Revolutionary Council and chair of Egyptians for Democracy UK. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd really like to thank the Cordoba Foundation for putting this meeting together. It's extremely timely, and I really welcome their ability to be able to bring such a broad spectrum of people together. I think it's extremely important that we have this discussion across a broad base of people. Let me start by saying something about the manifestation of what is referred to as political Islam, the recent manifestation, and I think that's very important. We've heard this morning that it's important to define which group we're talking about. But let us assume that we're talking about the broadest, the largest, and the most representative of groups. That is, for example, in the case of Egypt and across the Muslim world, the Muslim Brotherhood. And look at the manifestation of their politics in recent time. I think that there are certain statements that can be made, and again we're open to discussing this in the question period, is that they have remained the major bulwark against violence. That essentially today, in the midst of increasing pressure from authoritarian regimes throughout the Middle East region, particularly Egypt, and the country that I concentrate on and which I am actively engaged with, they have remained the major bulwark against the resort to violence. Secondly, they have engaged fully in the democratic process once it came about after the 2011 revolution. They engaged politically by forming a political party, the Freedom and Justice Party. They engaged in free and fair elections and referendum in which the people of Egypt made their choices freely and chose them above other parties, particularly the FJP. So their engagement in politics and their playing by the rules of the game singled them out, I would argue perhaps, as the most democratic of forces in Egypt. And the same can be said of the engagement of other parties across the region at different times, the Nahda in Tunisia, for example. In terms of the accusations made again against political Islam, that it doesn't evolve, that doesn't keep up with the times, I would argue again that is a misconception, that there is ongoing evolution within the movement of the Muslim Brotherhood, and much of the pressure for that evolution is coming from the youth, to which the elder figures in the Muslim Brotherhood have listened and have made and continue to make very important changes, and we hear this from the youth among the Muslim Brotherhood themselves. That doesn't mean that there aren't more changes that are needed, but the reality of the situation of on the ground has dictated that changes need to be made. So as a force that has strategic vision and is willing to evolve, I think the manifestation today is that they are continuing to attempt to do so. So what I'm trying to get at is that there are major misconceptions that require rigorous academic study, not only political statements which I am making, obviously as part of the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, to which I belong and represent, which has elements of the Muslim Brotherhood in it. But it is telling because, again, through this broad platform that is opposed to the military regime, there are a number of political forces, individuals, and a broad spectrum of political opinion that doesn't just include the Brotherhood. So again, another manifestation of the Brotherhood, which is the broadest and largest representative, if you like, of moderate political Islam, again, is the urge to become more inclusive and engage with others. The issue remains that this is a struggle on the ground in much of the Muslim majority countries, a struggle over rights. In the face of dictatorship, the struggle has been ongoing throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century for some very basic rights. The rights for the right for freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the call for accountability and participation. All the aspects of a democratic, of democracy and the democratic process. These rights have not been achieved across much of the Arab world. And the struggle for those rights has been carried through by various Islamist groups and organizations. We're not talking now about those that I believe are outside the spectrum of what is accepted, both in terms ethically, in terms of political rules and regulations, and in terms of religion, those that go outside that realm and resort to extremism and violence. I'm talking about the vast majority of Islamist movements. And those Islamist movements have been the bearers of the struggle for freedom and justice. They have, along with other secular and liberal and leftist forces, worked also for that freedom and justice. So I urge you for a moment to consider these movements and their struggle without the word Islam attached to it. To see the struggle today of those in Egypt fighting the military regime and its security forces and the violations of human rights, not as Islamists, but as people struggling for those rights, that have a vision in which they believe that struggle has components in it, or through which they are inspired to struggle because of their faith or because of the principles of their faith. But ultimately their struggle is universal, and it's a struggle that should be shared well beyond the borders of any region. So I think what we're facing today is essentially a need to understand that there is a vast middle ground in Muslim majority countries and among Muslims worldwide that is saying we need to ensure that those rights should be afforded regarding freedoms, regarding justice, regarding social justice, should be afforded to all peoples the world over. Irrespective of who the bearers of that struggle are, if they are struggling on the basis of principles that emanate from their religion, good and well, there is no problem with that, as long as they don't resort to violence in order to do so against innocence. And that is essentially the framework of most Islamist parties working on the ground today. One of the major strategies, if you like, of the Islamist movement is to ensure that the resistance in the Muslim world remains peaceful. They are also adamant that they become more inclusive. And finally, they are adamant that they reach out to the outside world. They don't want to work in isolation or to be marginalized or marginalize anyone else. But what they seek from the international community and civil society is not only a fair hearing, but they urge them to put pressure on their governments to review their policies regarding their support for dictatorship and ultimately the violence that emanates from such dictatorship in much of the Muslim world. So the struggle again is one over rights and the refusal of the Islamist movement to accept dictatorship that has lasted so long, for decades, in much of the Muslim world. And ultimately, I think we need to see the Islamist movements within the prism of a political struggle for liberation and rights, not in terms of what we are being told by others who oppose any resurgence or change in the political order in much of the Muslim world, that tells us that Islam is dogmatic, that it doesn't want change, that it is ultimately connected somehow to violence. All these are sensational statements that don't accord justice to the vast majority of Muslims struggling for freedom throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. This is a very rich feast, and there'll be a bit of time for some questions, so I'm sorry to rush things along. Now we have our very own Dr. Azam Tamimi, who's a British Palestinian academic and political activist, who's written a number of interesting books, including Hamas, A History from Within. Okay, I'm going to remind you though on the time.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله ومن والاه. Again, thanks to Anas, Abdullah and the team for organizing the function. And I was so keen to be here that I flew yesterday from Amman, escaping the sandstorm that was followed by a snowstorm. I was asked to speak about political Islam in Britain. And I've been really thinking about this, Anas. I mean, what can you say about political Islam in Britain? We've heard so much about how confusing this term is, how confusing the concept is. I mean, just let me tell you a very brief story. About 10 years ago, slightly more than 10 years ago, I was approached by Scotland Yard to help them in my capacity as one of the leaders of the Muslim Association of Britain in this country to salvage Finsbury Park Mosque, which I took the offer to my brothers, my colleagues, my brothers and sisters, and we agreed that it was in the best interests of the Muslim community, of Islam, of British society, that Finsbury Park Mosque should be returned to the community rather than remaining in the hands of a bunch of lunatics. And we worked with Scotland Yard all the way. We worked with them on other projects, not because we are lackeys or because we somehow sell ourselves to the enemy, as some people would probably from Al-Muhajirun would like to say, but because we believe this is our country, this is our society. We live here, and we want a safe, secure, free environment for ourselves, for our children, for everybody else. After all, we do appreciate that this is the country to which many of us came because we happened to be persecuted elsewhere. This is a country where, thanks to the values of democracy and human rights, you can find a safe haven and you can express your opinions. Now, unfortunately, afterwards, and the lesson from this story is that you cannot really put in one category Azam Tamimi, who salvaged Finsbury Park Mosque in collaboration with Scotland Yard, with Abu Hamza and his group in one category. If you put them in one category, then you are as lunatic, as crazy. It just cannot work this way. See, we came to this country as students. Some of us came as political asylum seekers. Most of Muslims in this country came as laborers much earlier and established communities. Now, when I look in the mirror, when I see myself in the mirror, what do I see? Azam Tamimi is considered to be a member of political Islam, an affiliate of this category of people. What do I see? I see a very simple Muslim being that believes that Islam consists of three main pillars. First, a set of rituals: Salat, Siyam, Zakat, Hajj. Second, a code of ethics. And third, a way of life. A set of principles in the way that I administer my life. Now, this distinguishes someone like me, who is committed to these three pillars, from someone who considers himself to be a Muslim, but doesn't care much about Salat, or doesn't care much about what happens in Palestine, or what happens in Egypt, or probably enjoys a pint of beer or a glass of wine. Yes, you find Muslims of this sort. You find Muslims who are committed to the rituals, but are not so interested in being politically active. So a Muslim who observes the rituals, a Muslim who believes in the doctrine, and a Muslim who cares about the rest of the Ummah happens to be Azam Tamimi, Anas al-Tikriti, and the affiliates of one strand of this huge category that we refer to as political Islam. So if I really want to talk about something that I know very well, I would, of course we don't have the time, but I would restrict myself to the affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood school of thought. That's the school of thought I belong to. It's a school of thought that believes that Islam is about living life with others in the best possible way, communicating your ideas peacefully, reforming what is wrong with society, and probably this is what causes a headache to so many people around the world. We were on excellent terms with the British government until we opposed the war in Iraq. Then we become a menace. Because we support the struggle of the Palestinian people, and because we don't consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, and yes, it is not a terrorist organization, then they don't like us. And you go and conduct a referendum among the Muslims wherever they happen to live. I bet you 99% of Muslims will tell you Hamas is a legitimate liberation movement. That's what it is. Israel, in our view, is the terrorist entity because it took my mother's house and it took my father's land and threw me out of my land. But they don't want to see this fact. We supported the Arab Spring, although we live in this country, but we love to see democracy spread in the Arab region. We supported the Arab Spring in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, everywhere, the whole region. And that displeased Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So they started sending emissaries to Cameron. Cameron, you have to do this, you have to do that. And Cameron is an elected prime minister. They wanted him even to close my TV station, Al-Hawar TV station. Several times they came to Cameron and asked him to close Al-Hawar TV station, the Saudis and the Emiratis in particular. And he turns to them and says, it doesn't work here like this. It doesn't work this way in the UK. If you have a case against them, take them to court. So you see, if Israel doesn't like you, if the despotic governments of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and all the other lousy governments in the Arab world don't like you, then that causes pressure to be built to build on the politicians of this country. And in this way, we become the menace that the Sunday Telegraph talks about occasionally, or some of the other newspapers. But let me assure everyone, let me assure the government as well, we believe in the cause of justice. And we know that like our brothers in Egypt and our sisters in Syria, Egypt, Yemen, and elsewhere, that even if we have to go to prison, even if we are persecuted because of what we believe in, we will not give up what we believe in. And we will continue to struggle, no matter what they call us, no matter what they label us. If this sort of political Islam is causing a problem to someone in this country, then good luck with ISIS and the likes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Is this working? Right, now we've got some time for questions. Who would like to start? Gentleman there.
Hello. Khalid Nadeem, South Asia Middle East Forum. How do you deal with the barriers which have arisen between the Muslim Brotherhood and Western governments? There seems to be a problem of communication between particularly the UK and US government with the Muslim Brotherhood at the moment. And what is the level of influence being exerted by Egypt and the Gulf states on this relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood and the West? Because this seems to be a big difficulty at the moment, how to go forward, because even when you're not dealing with a party which you're not friendly with, you need to have lines of communication, and the lines of communication seem to be very precarious at the moment.
I think the engagement certainly between the governments of the United States, the European Union, and the Muslim Brotherhood is extremely important. There is no reason to assume that there isn't an ongoing engagement and dialogue. It is the kind of dialogue that the government in Egypt particularly doesn't want to take place. But the Muslim Brotherhood and others that are opposed to, for example, the military regime in Egypt are constantly reaching out and putting forward explaining the situation in Egypt and exposing the military regime to all governments. It's part of what we do as the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, and it is partly what others from across the Egyptian political spectrum try to do. It's an important engagement, it's an important dialogue, and it will continue. I think the issue here is that there has been pressure, of course, from certain countries in the Gulf, but I think that is changing, and we must not assume that that is necessarily going to be static. After the death of King Abdullah, I think there is a certain attempts to review the stance of Saudi Arabia and others vis-à-vis the regime in Egypt. There may be some opening up. I think that will impact quite seriously on also relations between the United Kingdom and others as regards the regime in Egypt. It won't stop necessarily dealing with the regime in Egypt, but I think there is a growing feeling that the regime in Egypt is a liability, that the general's ability to hold on to power only through excessive force is not necessarily in the best interests of the United Kingdom and the US and others, and that the resort to violence on the part of the Egyptian regime will encourage violence and lack of security, and that will impinge on the interests of the countries like the United States and its allies. So I think the situation is moving fast, and the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as other opposition forces, will continue to put forward their case to Western governments.
Who else would like to come in? I'll take two or three now. And by the way, my father came from Northern Ireland, from a village just near the border, where there was lots of resistance to the British continuing occupation. Sometimes you have to just stand and keep speaking and resist. And obviously when the bombs were going off in Britain, things got tougher for the broader Irish community. But we ended up with negotiations. So you can do it. Right, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdulmir from Tower Hamlet Council. Just a hypothetical question. If, for example, now the land that ISIS controls now was taken over by, let's say, the Muslim Brotherhood, what would the difference be? And what key priorities would they implement in that particular region if the Muslim Brotherhood took over the areas that ISIS control now?
I'm going to take two or three so we can get a lot. Who else wanted to come in? Yes, John, and then the guy
In
there.
the Muslim world, Jan, much better.
When I was at school in the 1960s, one of our teachers was Egyptian. He was a Copt, and he was very, very bitter against the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in the period before Nasser, because his father had felt his whole village, the Copts, had essentially been driven out of it. And they had, now, I know there are always two sides to every story, and I know that there is sometimes a tendency to demonize the Muslim Brotherhood on this front, but I would like to hear a bit about where the Muslim Brotherhood stands today and how its thinking is evolving on the question of people of other faiths.
The guy there, in the pale blue.
Thank you. Jonathan Brown. It's a question about the AK Party in Turkey, really. I'd be interested to know, particularly Professor Oktay, it seems to me that the AK Party seems to be becoming increasingly authoritarian, and I suspect there's internal struggles within the party. I'm not interested in hearing that the opposition is really liberal and democratic. I think there's a lot of problems with those statements. But I'm interested in your view on the future of the AK Party's future, and does it remain democratic, or will it become increasingly authoritarian?
Thank you. So we've got one question each. Dr. Tamimi, Dr. Azam, and Professor Akhtai. I think the first question was for you. Didn't you address it to Dr. Tamimi?
Well, if the Muslim Brotherhood were to be given an opportunity to rule through democracy, I think the world would be much better. I mean, you saw what happened in Egypt. The Ikhwan did not come through a coup. They did not ride on tanks. They came through the ballot box. And it was the others who didn't like them, including the Copts, who unfortunately united themselves or embroiled themselves with the coup perpetrators out of unjustified fears that led to the current catastrophe in Egypt. And by the way, during Hassan al-Banna, rahmatullah alayhi, the Muslim Brotherhood had Christian members within the movement. And Hassan al-Banna's literature and writings and contacts with the Christians in Egypt are well documented. Of course, later on there were tensions, but these were the product of a political crisis. You see, when the army, when the armed officers take over anywhere in the world, they create political crises. And as a result of these political crises, people start justifying attacks on each other, being unfair to each other, etc. Now, of course, any progress toward a better system of governance will have to come through practice. We have lots of theory, we have very little practice. And what we were hoping in Egypt would happen is that the democratic process would be allowed to take its course for the first 4 years at least. And then if the Brotherhood regime didn't do well, then the Egyptian people had every right to replace them and change them through the ballot box. But that wasn't allowed to happen. But definitely the huge amount of literature we have about Islamic political thought, Islam and democracy, Islam and human rights will have to be put into practice, and there will be trial and error, and then it is up to the people to judge whether we uphold the principles we claim we believe to or not, we believe in or not.
Thank you. Dr. Azam?
The issue of the Copts is obviously an extremely challenging one when speaking to an audience like yourselves or any others. It's very complicated. And let me say this in terms of the current situation. The position of the Muslim Brotherhood is that the Copts are Egyptian citizens. So the Constitution of 2012 does not differentiate between them. It sees them as citizens. And so the official statements on the public policy is we're talking about Egyptian citizens. And the stance of the Morsi government was one of the complaints of the Copts was that they were not allowed the freedom to build churches. And that was done away with under Dr. Morsi. But the issue is we were dealing with a very short period in which also the church played a role, as did the Azhar, by the way, that was not in the best interests of the majority of society. And we saw this in terms of the coup. The picture of the general, the famous picture post the coup, had the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, and it had the Coptic patriarch as well. What we're talking about is institutions that should guide their people towards greater harmony and consolidation against the military force and for freedom and so on. I think we have to differentiate between what has been an ongoing level of sectarianism in Egyptian society over many dictatorships. We have examples of killings of Copts under Sadat, under Mubarak, and till now, I believe the military regime, and it's something we need to look out for very, very carefully, that we don't point a finger to the Islamists, because that's what the regime does. The military regime today, in order to survive, has used incitement to violence. I believe it will also use the sectarian card in order to save itself at some point, and will be able to sit back and allow Muslim and Copt to kill each other in Egypt. So regimes in Egypt have constantly played that card. Of course, there are tensions between communities in Upper Egypt that have represented themselves in Coptic Muslim terms. But there are also tensions between Muslim and Copt and Copt. So, in a sense, the sectarian issue has often been blown out of all proportions by the political order in Egypt. To safeguard against that, you do need to move towards the rule of law and democracy. At least it will be a safeguard in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And Turkey. Current developments in Turkey. I'm sure
thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Give me opportunity to explain something about Turkey. We probably you now hear many things about the authoritarianism or the ongoing growing authoritarianism in Turkey, and which I think it is really very ridiculous thing. Which is I am living in Turkey, and we know everybody who are paying any attention to Turkish close history. Should of course realize that what really radical change from the older situation to existing situation has happened, and of course that story, which is an authoritarian regime of Turkey, is a very interesting story, which has too much customers. That is I think the interesting thing, that has much ready prepared customers in the Western world, because it gives the chance to destroy the story, the only one Muslim success story in the world, which has combined democratization and probably Islamic values, not to say of Islamic State or Islamic State, but Islamic values and democracy in the world now. You can see in Turkey really in 12 years of AK Party period government, you can see a sort of silent revolution in terms of democratization, in terms of the increasing of expression of freedom of expression. And also you can see, for example, those who think about authoritarianism, I think that there is very strong movements in Turkey that which is called Gulen movement, which is very strong in media, which is very strong even within Turkey. They have many TV stations, they have many newspapers which are publishing and broadcasting within Turkey, and they are all the day they are talking about authoritarianism within an authoritarian state. That is a paradox, and that is even an irony actually. And how you can see, how you can talk about authoritarian state within authoritarian state? Can you talk about authoritarian state in Egypt? Can you talk about an authoritarian state in any authoritarian state? Can you talk about the authoritarian nature of any authoritarian state within that state? I think that is really ridiculous, because in Turkey we have now about 1,500 TV stations and about hundreds of newspapers. At least among these 70% of all these are belonging to the opposition. And from all the day they are broadcasting against the government, against the existing government, against Tayyip Erdogan. They are saying he's dictator, they are saying he's this and this, and they are criticizing in all ways. But nobody is prosecuted because his criticism. And there is another story, I think, which is really very black propaganda, which is made by these new groups on the other, in addition to other groups, of course. They are saying, for example, and what is surprising for us, disappointing from our point of view, especially the Freedom House report, which reported that there is many journalists arrested in Turkey, and we asked about the names of these journalists. Who are these journalists? Really, we are living in Turkey, and we didn't hear any journalist was arrested because he had made any journalistic activity. There is any journalist who is arrested because of his journalistic activities. Somebody who are supposed to be arrested are arrested because they are murderers, for example. They are smugglers. They are, for example, involved in some terrorist activities, and nobody asks about whether they are journalists or not when they are committed these crimes. If you are committing murder, nobody asks you whether you are a journalist. If you are a journalist, you will be privileged, or you will be, of course, positively discriminated. Nobody asks this. Of course, this is very ridiculous. And especially the groups, The Gulen groups, especially, I think, and unfortunately, is very, very successful in making this propaganda, and because they are very strong in media, and still their strength in the media is ongoing, and somebody from them, some journalist, one journalist only, arrested not because his journalistic activity, not because any idea he declared, not because his any article he wrote, not because any his declaration he made, but because he made a conspiracy, fabricated some evidences against some other journalist groups, and he caused them to be arrested for 3 years. About at least 10 journalists were arrested because of their fabrication of the evidences, and actually they were the only reason for making some pressure over the other journalists, and they are very, very intolerant in Turkey, and you cannot criticize Fethullah Gülen from their point of view, of course. I mean, in the time when they were relatively more legitimate in Turkey, nobody could criticize Fethullah Gülen, and now I am being tried because I criticized Fethullah Gülen. And hundreds of people are now in cases of the courts being prosecuted because they criticized in this or another way Fethullah Gülen. But nobody is being prosecuted because he criticized Tayyip Erdogan now. But Tayyip Erdogan, the image of Tayyip Erdogan, who is the only, I think, successful story in the world, in the Muslim world, is trying to be destroyed, is trying to be deconstructed. And if a Muslim and democracy story, successful Muslim and democracy, the only Muslim democracy story tried to be destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you. We could feel the strength of feeling. We've got time for a couple more questions. We've got to finish at 5 past so you can get your tea break, so we can keep the woman here and the guy right at the back.
Thank you. My name is Muna Al-Qazzaz. I am a member of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and a former spokeswoman for the office in London. Professor Aksai and Dr. Tamimi mentioned that grouping all the Islamic or political Islamic movements in one sack or one bag has a lot of repercussions. I was wondering maybe if Dr. Maha Azam can tell us what does she think on a societal level and on the individual level, what are the repercussions? So what are the repercussions here in the UK for different organizations functioning, and what could be the repercussions even on the individuals?
This guy right at the back. And there was a woman in the middle, if you could squeeze it in, if you'd all be brief.
Thank you very much. So my name is Mariam. I'm from the Muslim Association of Britain, and my question is to Dr. Maha. This is in regards to the youth advocating for political changes within the Muslim Brotherhood. But how is that development for women who want opportunities to participate in politics and be more involved in the higher order of the Muslim Brotherhood? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the guy at the back. And then if the answers can be relatively brief, we can keep on time.
My name is Ergin Yaman. I'm a consultant social worker working for London Borough of Hackney. And my question is for the Right Honourable Claire Short. If she could answer, I know she's the moderator. I just wanted to basically ask a question about democracy. As everyone basically maybe many people in this room would know, there is a significant remark from Hassan al-Banna in relation to what democracy is. And he says democracy is like an idol. And if it is basically in favor of...
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Is like an idol.
Is what?
Idol. Yeah.
Idol.
Democracy is like an idol?
That's right. And if it is in favor of basically Western rulers, then fine. But if it is not in their favor, then it's a horrible thing. Now in Turkey, democracy is being basically injected to Middle East and other countries, and we had AK Party winning elections basically one after the other with a huge majority. But during the uprising of Gezi protests, we heard from basically Western rulers, Obama, that democracy is not all about elections. Same went for the
Be brief, please.
Yeah, same went for basically Egypt. And my question is basically, when is West gonna basically commit to democracy? Because they have Middle East has tested their commitment to democracy, and they have failed and failed. And I think the review of Muslim Brotherhood as to whether they are a terrorist organization or not is in itself basically as a disgrace, because Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi didn't kill anyone, but Sisi basically has murdered many people, and it's not him who is being reviewed, but it's Muslim Brotherhood. And that's a disgrace in itself.
That was a nice little speech. briefly, for platform, yeah. Well, just say whatever you want to say, just to wind up. We've only got a few.
Now, regarding the first question, I know you addressed the question to Maha, but if I may say so, I think it would be much better if people addressed singular organizations, the positive and the negative that is to do with that organization. I know that at the moment the government is worried about ISIS, but it's also worried about the Muslim Brotherhood. So rather than talk about broad terms, political Islam, tell us what is your problem with the Muslim Brotherhood, and then we can then try and resolve these issues. But if you have a problem with ISIS, then good luck in whatever you are trying to do, although in my opinion it's just a waste of resources bombing ISIS from the upper heavens. But it doesn't matter, that's for them to decide. But with regard to mainstream organizations in this country, there should be transparency. The government should be speaking to us, should question us. We should have a constructive dialogue, because we are here, we are involved, and we are also authoritative. And they have to understand this. We have influence within the Muslim community, and most of the Muslim community agrees with our point of views on various issues.
Thank you very much. Let me add to your question. I think the danger of seeing all Islamist groups as one and all prone to violence is going to lead to more violence. We were told over decades in academic sources, particularly in the 70s and 80s, that we must look at the variety of Islam. The emphasis was on variety. What we're seeing now is a complete reversal of this attempt to look at the various expressions of political Islam and the different expressions of it in the Muslim world. And there is a clear political motivation behind this, in order to undermine any expression of political Islam that can lead to change of particular regimes in the Muslim world. And we need to differentiate between them, because it will create greater frustration among the young. I'm not saying all the young. There is a commitment, as I say again, for the vast majority of the Islamist movement and Muslims not to resort to violence, and they will not resort to violence. But we're talking about the kind of arguments that you would be giving and support to those extremists that will say they're lumping you all together. There is only one way to deal with those that are suppressing us, and that is the resort to force. There needs to be differentiation. You need to listen, I think, very clearly to what the movements and the participants in these movements are saying. So governments, at the very least, should be able to differentiate between both in order to open the middle ground for those that have participated in democracy, will participate in democracy once there is the opportunity to do so. And that is what the struggle in Egypt is all about. We want the military regime to fall. We're going to work for it, to bring it down, in order to have a civil and democratic society in which all can participate, including the Freedom and Justice Party and all parties, Islamist, non-Islamist, leftist, socialists. That is what we wanted after the January 25th revolution. That's what the Arab Spring is about. And that is what the second wave of revolution is going to be about as well. But we want to limit the radicalization and the arguments of those saying that violence is the only way. And governments in the West need to help us in this by not putting all the Islamists in one basket. Just very briefly on the women. Yeah. On the issue of women, yes, the reality is women are there on the ground at a grassroots level. They're there participating in the demonstrations every day in Egypt, in the protests, and in Tunisia, and so on. what we're talking about is institutionalizing that participation. And I believe there have been changes within all movements, and the strategies for change need to be, yes, institutionalized, and I believe that will come with time, because often people say that once the revolution or the change is achieved, women go back to their homes. I believe this time something very different is happening on the ground, across the board, from both men and women, and women's role will only increase and not diminish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Akhtar.
Thank you very much. I would like to go back to my first question, or for title, first title about the open society and its enemies in the Muslim, the democratic society and its enemies in the Muslim world. And I mentioned about the possible enemy is supposed to be the Islamist or the political Islam, but of course my answer is not this. After that we witnessed during these 3 or 4 years in the Muslim world after the Arab Spring, that became very obvious, that very clear that the supposed the enemies of the democracy in the Muslim world are not the Muslims or the Muslim Brotherhood, the demonized Muslim Brotherhood or the demonized political Islamists. They came in democratic way, they came in power, and they were very well prepared and very ready and accepted to go by elections if needed. And but somebody made a coup d'etat against them, and those who made the coup d'etat were in this or another way somehow welcomed by the Western world, which are seeking for democracy in the Muslim world. And that is really very interesting thing that we should be focusing on. And this is the paradox of the Muslim world also. And the enemies of the democracy in the Muslim world. And the Muslim, just to remind, thank you for Ergin when he reminded me about the Gezi movement. The Gezi movement was simultaneously it took place in the same time of Tamarrut movement in Egypt, when the Tamarrut, I mean in Tahrir Square, people were gathered against Mohammed Morsi because of accusing him to be very authoritarian. And what came after this accusing or criticism of authoritarianism? It came a coup d'etat, and now we have Sisi. And I think the same thing after the Gezi movement was motivated on the base of the criticism of Tayyip Erdogan or AK Party movement, because it is an authoritarian regime, is an authoritarian party, even though we have elections. And now after this Gezi movement we passed through 2 elections, one local elections and the other presidential elections, and now we are in the eve of the next election, in the parliamentary election. If anybody have any criticism, any objection to the existing government, he can for example send Tayyip Erdogan or his team, and he can bring any other who is supposed not to be authoritarian. I mean the regime is open, democracy is working in Turkey, and there is no danger of authoritarianism, but still the discourse of authoritarianism is being employed by somebody, and this I think we should take lesson from the history, from that very close the history which we are living in, and this is to create and to try to get the same results, the same consequence result which was taken in Egypt. Thank you.
Well, could we, and the answer to the young men at the back, because we're really out of time, is exploring the nature and manifestation of political Islam today. All our panelists say it's a quest for democracy, for freedom of speech, for the rule of law, for everyone to be respected and have dignity. The West has versions of it, imperfect, but everybody needs freedom of speech, dignity, the chance to have their voice heard. And all over the world, we should quest for that. That's my answer to you. Can we please thank our panel very warmly for starting us off so well?